Hello everybody. As we move toward the finish of a course in which we critically analyzed a relatively wide swatch of educational research, it seems appropriate that a portion of our parting commentary should be directed toward a constructive criticism of the nature of this research. We begin by observing that a huge, varied, and colorful literature on what makes for a successful school and school leadership has been created over many years. By successful is usually meant considerably beyond expectation and average student academic performance. Much evidence has been collected and many criteria for success have been generated. However, it is painfully apparent that much of this evidence is merely anecdotal, rarely rising above urbane narrative, soaked with sentiment and wishful thinking. A large segment of this so-called evidence purports that successful schools are the products of effective leadership, that good schools have principals who publicly convey the conviction that most students are cognitively capable of learning. These principals believe that teachers trained in the didactic of the 5 C's of learning, the 5 C's being context, curiosity, control, challenge, and confidence, provide the most amenable atmosphere in which to pursue academics. These principles will encourage or arrange poor teachers to leave or to find another school. They monitor student performance data to see if the instructional strategies are working. And these principles encourage parent involvement in the education of their children. However, one of the major problems with the literature on successful schools and effective leadership is that the associated research deals with schools serving disadvantaged populations, of which it is either claimed that emphasizing the basics is the most effective way of helping these populations, or enriching the curriculum is the most effective way of increasing academic prowess. With either claim, what is generally accepted is that schools with the best academic outcomes have exceptional principals, practicing the best educational strategies, and who hire, help, and monitor teachers who are the most committed to the academic success of their students. Even though they may not last very long, consider the fate of teachers in a KIP program. KIP is, many of you probably know this, Knowledge is Power program. Upon in-depth scrutiny, what is discovered is that researchers for the most part are content with statistical correlation, using often the Cohen's d statistic or multiple regression analyses, rather than causation. Correlations merely reflect the fact that successful academic outcomes positively correlate significantly with effective leadership. In many cases, this, of course, would be true, because the population research is the one that is easiest to help. Principals will look good if their teachers, students, and stakeholders are easy to work with. So although there are many stories about how successful schools are associated with effective leadership, there are not many facts about the causative agencies needed to improve underperforming schools. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year are spent in the United States on educational research, producing thousands of published research results, most of which some critics claim, in fact quite a few critics claim, are effectively worthless. Why? Because the research is mostly anecdotal, as mentioned above, and much of it is either intentionally devoid of or even completely opposed to experimental methodologies. In other words, very little of current educational research is scientifically acceptable. In addition, some educational research outcomes are tainted by political and/or ideological perspectives and vested interests. In the following, I'll provide 2 examples of unscientific research interpreted through political and ideological lenses. A conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, reported that it found 21 low-performing, high-poverty schools that dramatically improved academic achievement levels above the national norms. These schools purportedly were led by no-nonsense principals who publicly conveyed the conviction that most students are cognitively capable of learning the basics, encouraged or arranged for poor teachers to leave their schools, monitored students' performance data to see if the instructional strategies regarding the basics were working, maintained a high level of behavioral discipline, and encouraged parent involvement in the education of their children. However, upon closer inspection of the Foundation's report, we find that only 6 of the 21 were fully non-selective schools, meaning that the researchers did not offer the research intervention to these schools, meaning that they were chosen randomly. The remainder of the schools in the study were either magnet schools, schools where impoverished meant that parents were graduate students, schools that produced high scores early on by concentrating on the basics, but whose scores declined dramatically in the latter grades because the emphasis on the basics seriously affected cognitive learning skills, affected reasoning, critical thinking, and interpretation skills that are necessary for success in the upper grades. Or schools where parents had to apply for membership in a study, thereby introducing self-selection bias into the research. The Education Trust, a liberal organization, was reported to have uncovered 1,320 schools in which almost half of the student body in each was both minority and poor, and whose test scores were in the 70th percentile for their respective states. It didn't take close reading of the report to uncover this fact. The schools did indeed have high scores, but only in one subject, and only in one grade, and only for 1 year. It must be emphasized that only research designs that identify a specific population and then randomly assign some of the subjects to the treatment condition and some to the non-treatment or some alternative condition count as scientific research. This is a modest standard for all scientific research, yet it is rarely met in research on educational interventions. The bottom line is, without knowing that a treatment is effective, there is no way of knowing how a treatment is effective. There is at least some research that uses some form of control. In this research, the investigators decide on target schools for the intervention and then compare their performance based on a certain set of criteria such as socioeconomic status with performance of other schools not offered the intervention. This type of research is subject to self-selection problems because the schools that were offered the intervention may be significantly different in some unknown ways from those schools not offered the intervention. Some very good, at least quasi-scientifically based research persuasively has reported that number one, money per se does not make a great deal of difference regarding all of the parameters of successful schooling and effective leadership. Be back in a moment.